What's up, guys? Here we are on Friday trying out a new segment. We got drinks on happy hour with the Elite Rounders crew, and we're going to start today off just going over a really cool hand that we saw on Live at the Bike the other night in the 100-200 cash game. So we're just going to jump right into this hand. It's pretty wild what happens, and there's a couple good lessons that Marko and I wanted to talk about with you guys involving blockers most notably. So let's just check this hand out. Like I said, we got 100, 200. The action is folded to Andy, who opens to 600 with 8-9 offsuit. Here we have Mr. Garrett Adelstein, who has now become my new favorite poker player. He also is on Survivor, if I'm not mistaken. We'll look that up at the end of the show to confirm. He 3-bets with Ace-Jack. Bill Klein, well-known billionaire and philanthropist, cold calls for 2,000 with the Ace-Queen. And the action's going to come all the way back to Andy, who will also call with the 8-9. Nothing too...
Okay, so a couple questions about that. Like, in terms of like gas game opening like 9-8 off, that's my first idea. What do you think about that? Especially
I'm
when
not a
Garrett
cash game authority, but to me it seems a little wide for sure. But these guys are really wild, and with a big blind Annie out there, I suppose playing more aggressive has some merits. What do you think?
I mean, when you have Garrett in the button, like, he's going to make your life probably very miserable playing hand like as weak as 9-8 off.
Yeah.
Is this his bottom range? Like, if you're playing that bad hands and you have good player in position, I think your life will be very miserable. It is funny because he actually in this hand, it might be the opposite. What I'm saying here might happen in this hand, but
yes, you're so right. Yes,
it is, in my opinion, like, I think if someone's competent on the button, you just have to respect them a bit, and you shouldn't be opening crap like this, basically.
Yeah, I totally dig that. I think that if the button was a weaker player who wasn't playing many hands, really passive, I think it'd be reasonable maybe as the bottom of your range, but I think you nailed it. With a strong player, I mean, hell, one of the best players in the world sitting on the button, you're asking for trouble opening 8-9 off in this spot. But Andy's really going to stick it to us by the end of this hand after we said that, so I guess we should hold our words, right?
So, and what do you think about the Bills flat here with ace-queen off?
Yeah, it's tough. I'm not a big fan of cold flatting in general because I think it presents a lot of difficult spots post-flop. However, I think there's no way he could fold this hand against a Garrett 3-bet on the button, which we've seen in a lot of these videos. Garrett will have an incredibly wide range here, so Bill can be dominating him a fair amount of the time, as he is here. But, as we'll see post-flop, dominating him pre-flop doesn't really mean anything sometimes when you're out of position. Sometimes having the best hand, if you're out of position, awkward stack sizes against tough players, it might not really matter a lot of the time, So I do think his call is reasonable, but in general, especially for our students and people watching this, I'd recommend trying not to cold flat too often, as it's usually going to put yourself in pretty difficult spots, especially when you're out of position.
Exactly. So in this case, probably we would rather see Bill like 4-bet here than call, and I think that will be for him much more profitable option, especially when you're playing this deep and you'll be out of position with ace-queen off, which technically looks like a nice hand, but now there's another problem. Andy is going to actually flat behind with 9-8 off because he's in position, at least, well, not to Bill at least. But actually, I think that's kind of comical call too. Like, how can he call with 9-8 off? That's another question I have. This game is wild. Like, I mean, yeah, opening 9-8 off, then calling 3-bets 9-8 off seems kind of wild.
Yeah. And I think
way.
If Bill calls there, he just knows that Andy's going to call anything, so he's going to play ace-queen off 3 ways out of position.
Exactly.
And that doesn't sound fun.
Exactly. So basically, Andy is going to crush his equity in this hand with the ace-queen. Because he's going to call, like, he's just going to lose his equity basically in this hand when he calls behind, and exactly what happens. Now he's behind both these players with the ace-queen.
So Bill's toast here, obviously, is check folding. Andy has the middle pair, some backdoor equity, and Garrett's got the best of the bunch with top pair, top kicker, backdoor nut flush draw. So actually, the action's to Garrett here. Go ahead.
It is funny you mentioned, like, it's just a fold now, but now actually Andy ends up calling, right?
Bill
ends up calling.
Yeah, pause it for a second, actually, to discuss Bill's call. Something that I think is a misconception. I hear this a lot from students. I really wanted to point this out. I'm glad you mentioned this about Bill. So definitely Bill should just be folding on this flop, right? Garrett's c-bet was standard, but I think something that I hear a lot from students in Bill's seat is they'll say, well, I have two overs, right? I don't think that's really a fair thing to say in this spot because it's very likely one of the opponents has queen jack or ace jack or even like ace nine, queen nine suited. It's very likely that Bill's overs. So I think saying that you have two overs with ace queen on a board like this is a really flawed process and just doesn't make a ton of sense. So be careful when you say to yourself, I have two overs. Make sure you think, okay, if I hit my overs, are they still good? Because sometimes they're compromised by two pair in these spots or a straight.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's like, it's fine to call overs when those are hands which can actually improve you to a top pair, top kicker type of hand, or top pair, great kicker, which is not counterfeited by straights and two pairs. And like in this case, you hit a queen. Are you actually happy? Versus one player,
King
two
10
players.
might be out there. Absolutely, yeah.
Exactly. So it's kind of, it's like everything you can hit. Again, I think this is a spot where I would rather again see Bill raise instead of call. I think calling versus half pot bet here is probably very marginal, especially when there's again player behind who's flatting and their range is probably like very much towards like hand exactly hitting this board. So
and Bill doesn't have a spade. It should be an easy fold for him here. He has there's no reason for him to be calling in this spot. Yeah. This is where it gets real interesting. So now Garrett hits the nut flush draw with the spade redraw, and Andy nails trips in this spot. So it looks like Andy checks, and the action's on Garrett, who also decides to check back. So what do you think about Garrett's check back here, Marko?
I think it's a real fear that somebody has 9. I don't know exactly like what is Bill's range here. If he's flatting, like I don't know how loose is he, a loose player or a very tight player in general.
Yeah, he's a bit tighter, I would say. Yes. But he's known to splash occasionally. He doesn't really care about the money, so he likes to gamble sometimes.
Okay, so most likely he doesn't have too many 9s, but like Andy's the problem here. When he calls this flop, I mean, he's going to have so many flush draws, a lot of 9s. So I think it's very reasonable for Garrett to just check here, I think. Yep. I don't like, what are you getting value from here? It's like, it's becoming really thin. I mean, yep. So basically you're targeting only king jack, queen jack, and if you bet big, yep. So if you bet big,
you might not get value from those on the river, right?
Exactly. Or yeah, exactly. You might not even, they might actually fold here. If somebody has queen jack here without spade, it should be folded basically. Yep. So
I agree.
Again, it's not like you can get value by betting. It's mostly for protection, but again, you have this ace of spade, so there's not really that much need for protection per se, other than the straight draws, right?
I agree. I actually had a spot just like this with a student yesterday. It's very similar where he had aces and he turned the nut flush draw and he bet and his opponent check raised all in. And he was just in a bad spot, where he didn't want to call the all-in because he knew he was beat, and he also didn't want to fold with the nut flush draw. So I think it's important in these spots where you do have that backdoor nut flush draw. Make sure you check in a lot of these situations on the turn because realizing your equity on the river is the most important thing. So here we go. It looks like Garrett hit the nut flush on the river, and the pot is about 17,000. Andy has checked to Garrett, and now Garrett is contemplating how much to bet. And this, ladies and gentlemen, is where shit gets weird. So Garrett bets 15,000. So Bill can finally fold.
15,000 to 7,600. So like 85%.
Okay. Yeah, he bet almost pot here. Exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
Finally, Bill decides to relinquish his hand. My God, I don't know what took him so long.
Now I get folded. And if he had the spade, he would have been in bigger trouble, I guess. Queen of spades.
Yeah, exactly. If he had the queen of spades, he would have called a bet here for sure against Garrett. Everyone knows Garrett has some bluffs in his range. So now this is where it gets fun. Action back to Andy, who now has the 8 of spades, so he has a flush. But Andy's got a lot of other stuff in his favor right here. And so let's see what happens.
So, but when you actually think about this spot, like when Andy's facing this situation, now you're sitting here with 8 high flush. What are your thoughts? Like, can you actually call this bet profitably? That's the first question, right? Should I call this? Is calling going to be more profitable than shoving, for example? Like, first instinct here is obviously, for me, is like if I should call this, like, but then becomes like the question, like maybe I have other option which could be more profitable. So I guess in his shoes, he thought like calling might not be actually that profitable. It might be something like break even-ish or I don't know, okay, max. But if he jams and Garrett folds ace high flush, he's making ton of money because like Garrett
Yep.
might be bluffing here sometimes, and if he folds at ace high flush, he never calls him. He's going to fold
Absolutely.
like 95% of the time basically or something.
I think there's a lot of stuff going on here. I think you're right in that the eight of spades does have a little bit of showdown value. I think that if he calls here, I do think Garrett has some bluffs. But I also think, he might have a timing tell. And there it is. He is all in, ladies and gentlemen, for 80,000. So a couple of things. I think that, like we said, the eight of spades could be reasonable for a call there, but he might have to tell on Garrett too. When Garrett checks back the turn and then bets near pot on the river, I think Andy might feel there's not a ton of pure bluffs in his range in that spot, maybe not with that sizing. And then Garrett's sizing was a little bit more value laden, where he's trying to, he check back turn with an ace jack or a king jack or a king queen with one spade type hand. And now he's just betting the river, trying to get value with it. I think that makes a ton of sense. So I think that I would turn to the mischievous thoughts that you mentioned about possibly pulling off this big bluff. And the things that jump out to me right here about his hand, that you briefly touched on, he's got some amazing blockers here. Like, so he's blocking one of the nines, right? Mm-hmm. But most importantly, he's got that eight of spades. So that prevents it looks like there are, is it two straight flush draws out there? Yep, there's 8-10 of spades and 8-6 of spades out there, right? So he's blocking both of the nut straight flush draw combos, both of which are absolutely in Andy's range right now. And honestly, this is a spot where I could see Garrett folding like a small full house even, right? Because Andy's like really credibly repping one of those two straight flushes. I think it's an amazing spot to go for this bluff. I sure as hell don't have the balls to pull off what Andy's pulling off for that kind of money, the amount of money to be a down payment on a house. But the logic is there, and he's got the blockers for it. It makes so much sense. What's your take on this? I mean, I just saw this and my jaw hit the floor.
Well, obviously, in this hand, they're actually playing super, super, super deep. I mean, first of all, that's so basically like if the blinds are like 200, of course, there's like the tricky, whatever, two small blinds or whatever antes or whatever involved in this. But like they're basically playing like what, 400 big blinds deep or whatever. Is like
at least,
yeah. So calling ace high flush on this river, 400 big blinds deep is not comfortable. Like it's just not. It's probably like it's probably similar to the Helmut hand we did. It's probably like GTO fold anyway, right? Like he can probably just call off like his boats or something, or like quads if he would have, but he doesn't have because the 9.
But what about that? What do you think about it? What if you had fives full? Is fives full that different from the ace of spades in this spot for Garrett? Like they're both still bluff catchers, right?
Well, jacks is interesting because actually jack is interesting because that will be one of the hands and it would shove, right? Like, I mean, that would be still
jack 9-9.
Exactly. Like jack is kind of important because like Andy could flat preflop with jacks, I guess, or he could 4-bet. I think he would flat, but that's actually, it is kind of important. But like when it comes to like the 9 is just awesome hand because like that looks like Garrett having like quads, so many boats. Like, well, I mean, I guess he could have jack 9 too.
Well, that's what's crazy for even Garrett. Like, so Garrett's blocking the jack, which makes it less likely Andy has jack, and it makes it less likely that Andy has jack 9, right? So, like, suddenly, maybe ace jack is actually better with the spade is better for Garrett to have here than 5-5 because he does block, that means Andy will have less jack. There's less combos of jack. He can have less combos of jack 9 he can have. So like, even though a full house is a better hand than the ace high flush, Garrett is blocking a lot of those hands that Andy could have here for value, a lot of the combinations of jacks or jack nine. So I guess, as weird as it sounds, having the ace jack with the ace of spades is better than having fives full or sevens full in this spot, I guess. What do you think about that?
Well, fives of, but I think even before we discuss any blocker effect here, is like, first of all, is your villain capable of bluffing here? Like
Of
that
course.
should be the
First
first
question you got to
Is
ask,
like,
yeah.
does somebody have balls to just bluff here all in forehand big
Andy
blind deep?
does.
So I think that would be
Andy
my
does for
first
sure.
question. It's like, and then you have to come up with those bluffs. 9x makes a lot of sense, and I think why Garrett falls here, I do think like, so he probably knows that Andy's playing super wide range. Like now when you put his way, like if he was playing reasonable range, right? He should never have 9-8 offsuit, first of all. Like, I mean,
Yeah.
this is already like very kind of crazy, to me. And when you add the 9-8 off, like he could have like Jack 9, right? Like he can have so many boats now, first of all. But which boats would he jam? But I think versus Garrett's line, this looks more like ace high flush than it looks boat. So I think he still needs to like raise at least boats, I believe. Because Garrett could also bet like queen high, king high, ace high flushes, right? So I think you
Yeah.
need to raise those boats. But like, of course, that then becomes question like, is Garrett actually calling with verse? Is he actually calling ace high flush, right? So you're not really gaining too much value even shoving like both here if Garrett is folding ace high flush, right?
Yeah.
So
And it's also tough too, because something you mentioned about Andy's wide opening range, like, I like how you said, first, anytime we're in these spots, if you're in Garrett's shoes, the first question you should ask yourself is, what's the worst hand my opponent would do this for value with, right?
yeah,
So I imagine the worst hand that Andy would do this for value with would be like sevens full, maybe like jack nine, like I guess maybe fives full, but it seems questionable, right? And so there's a few combos, like we said, jack nine, jack jack, sevens full, then the straight flushes. But like the next question after that would be, what does his bluff range look like, right? That's where I'm confused. What do you think Andy's bluff range looks like? I mean, because we agree that 8-9's on the wide opening side, and that's what allows him to have the 8 of spades blocker here. I don't really see many instances where you can ever have the 6 of spades blocker. I guess something that includes the 10 of spades, maybe? I don't know. What do you think? What do you think Andy's bluff range could look like here?
But I think that's why it's so messed up. Maybe Garrett even doesn't give him credit. Like, I don't know how much they have history, how much they know each other. If Garrett doesn't give him that many offsuit combinations like 9-8, if he would know that he has 9-8 off, he could come up with few bluffs. Like maybe he could have like this 10-9 off or something like that. Queen 9 off, right? Like then there's like suddenly more hands and more hands, right?
Yep.
But if he doesn't even believe he's flatting these 9-8 off, this is like probably snap fold actually, because like what bluffs? This is like the best bluff you can ever have. Like
Not many, right?
so it does feel like that if he doesn't flat those offsuit hands, it's really tough to find a bluff here. Other than something like, I guess actually maybe something ridiculous like ace jack would be decent because you could rep like jacks full, right?
Yeah, you block the jack. I mean,
So
could he have like a king 10 with the 10 of spades maybe? I feel like that would have found a fold earlier at some point, right?
king 10 with the king.
King 10 or queen 10 with the 10 of spades, so he blocks the straight flush draw.
I guess he could have that. Like, I mean, he calls the flop definitely, right? Like, he's not folding flush draw, backdoor gut shot, and the potential backdoor flush, right? So I don't think he's folding that.
Agreed.
So I think that would be reasonable. But like, yeah, there's not tons of hands. It's but the point is like the bluffs are coming mostly from only the offsuit hands, really. I mean, that's where it gets kind of messed up. So I guess like maybe something like ace jack, he could just rip here and rip like jacks, which would be ballsy move. But like,
Yeah, really ballsy, even ballsier than this.
yeah, that's kind of interesting. But in a sense,
I will
like,
say these are some of the most impressive spots, like, again, this is another common refrain from students, and they'll be like, oh, what if he's turning this into a bluff? I think it's rare that you see someone that turns a made hand into a bluff. And so this spot he had trips, and then he hits a flush, and then he turns into a bluff. That's just not something you see that often, and it's honestly not something you guys are going to want to do too often either. This spot is particular because Andy, like we said, has some major cojones, but not only
Yeah,
that, he knows that Garrett is a thinking player.
yeah.
He knows Garrett is aggressive and is not going to have only nutted hands when he bets that river. But even such, he knows Garrett can fold monsters here because Garrett's an incredibly sharp thinking player. So I think it's important when you guys are trying your bluffs, A, make sure you're repping something credible. B, know what you're trying to make fold. And C, make sure the person is capable of making these folds. Don't try to bluff an idiot. Idiots don't fold, you know?
Yeah, exactly. Don't try this on $11 tournament on stars or something.
Exactly, yes.
And you will get
do not try
snap
this at home,
called. It's
kids.
like snap called. You're like, oh, this is the most amazing bluff in the history of poker, and then snap call with ace high flush. Never folding.
Exactly.
Like, I think also like I feel like online it's so much easier to make stupid plays, to be honest, because like I do think live poker has in a sense like you need to keep your reputation in a sense. I don't know, you know the feeling I'm talking about. I feel like online it's just like, okay, you punt off stack, okay, who cares? Nobody knows me, right? Like
Yep.
it's a little bit like that. So people don't like folding too much in general.
Amen.
So
That's the essence. That's the key right there. People don't like to fold, so don't try to make them do something they don't want to do. That's just not human
yeah,
nature,
yeah. But yeah, otherwise I think it's actually it's kind of like, I guess like Andy's position on this river, like I guess he figured out like shoving will be way more profitable than calling, so he had easy choice to shove. Technically, this is like, you could say it's easy choice to shove. It makes so much sense. And it takes
I
a lot
wonder
of,
what he would have done if he had Queen 10 with the Queen of Spades or 10 of Spades. I wonder if he would have just called with those, or if he would have also considered turning his hand into a bluff as well. I'm assuming with the 10 of Spades, he would have still done the same thing. Maybe Queen 10 off with the Queen of Spades, maybe he would just call.
I think like when he doesn't block any of those full houses, he will be just way more likely to call, I think.
Yeah,
Or
makes sense.
fold, or even fold. Because it does like, I think Garrett could check back like every bolt he has. I think it's possible, totally possible. Like Jack 9 is doesn't mean that he's going to check, but I'm saying that he could definitely check back, and he could also have actually sevens full as well now on river by accident.
It is sick though that even if Garrett had Jack 9 and Andy did this, that there would still be three hands beating him. Like I'm sure Garrett would have called with the Jack 9,
Yeah.
but like he would have definitely had to think about it for like a minute because he's not holding, he's got like the fourth nuts, which is kind of crazy.
I guess Jack 9 is way too high. If he thinks like, if he jams fives, 9-7, so it's probably snap. Then also potential bluff, which is pretty unlikely, but as we see, potential. There's
So
some
that's the
potential.
key though. Like, so say you're sitting there with Jack 9 and it's in a guy who just doesn't bluff, someone who's not as ballsy as Andy, check shoves, you can consider making a fold because that person, if they just don't bluff, they might very well have one of the two straight flushes or a better boat, Like you would need to make sure that if they have no bluffs in their range, you would need to know that they would damn well be shoving fives full or sevens full. Otherwise, you're just going to be paying them off when they have the three nutted hands, So knowing that your opponent has some bluffs in their range really changes the dynamic in these spots immensely.
It will be interesting to see Phil Hellmuth shove here, and what would you do? I think this would be...
Fold everything but the top straight flush.
He wouldn't have 10-8 suited or 8-6 suited. Only idiots.
Yeah, he wouldn't play those pre-flop. That's a good point. Yeah, exactly. He would just have jacks full most of the time, I imagine. Yeah, or quad nines. Yeah,
exactly. So I don't know. In a sense, like it's a great play, but on the river, I feel like it's almost like, how do you say, mandatory, like shove. I feel like. But again, I think this is like very specific spot online.
Very rare.
This will never work.
Yes.
This work when you are 400 big blinds deep or whatever, and thinking player. But yeah, this is.
Yes, don't try this at home, folks. Do not try this at home. But It's interesting because I think both of them play it well. I agree with you. I think Andy makes a badass bluff here, and I think Garrett's fold makes a ton of sense. Like I was actually surprised Garrett thought about it as long as he did. I
Mm,
think if Garrett had black aces or ace king with the ace of spades, I think he would have folded pretty quickly. But I think that jack blocker really
mm.
made him think extra long and hard about this for sure. You know, knowing that like, damn, does he really have jack nine or jack jack here or the straight flushes? Like, so I do think that jack blocker was immensely, key in Garrett really contemplating this decision. And without it, I imagine it would have been almost a trivial fold, as weird as it sounds for him.
Yeah, that's actually an interesting point. Maybe that's why he ends up thinking about this for a few minutes. Because like when he blocks like so many value hands, like Jack nine, jacks, Jack seven, Jack five suited, right? Like I mean, this guy could have all of these hands after calling 9-8 off, so he could have
Yep.
Jack five suited, right? Like, oh, sorry, Jack five. Sorry, it's not a both. Jack's full, Jack nine, 9-7, 9-5. So
Look at Garrett's face. Like, we are all Garrett Adelstein. Like, God, we know
uh,
this feeling. Like, we've all been in these spots where we're like, really? Like, this guy's going to shove here on me? Like, really? You really got it in this spot? It's just the worst feeling. And honestly, most of the time, this is probably negative reinforcement because most of the time when someone check raises the river, they usually have it, guys. Like, it's really rare that people check raise the bluff on the river. Maybe you can use that to your benefit when you're up against a smart player who also
mm,
thinks that way. But typically, if you bet the river and someone check raises you, it's just super rare that they're bluffing, you know? So I just wouldn't be hero calling too often in these situations. I think you'll be kind of donating money for the most part.
yeah, it's funny. Like in terms of this hand, it looks like Garrett is making bad decision here by folding, but I think both played perfectly. Like
I
that's
agree. Well said.
you know not the pre-flop. I personally think the pre-flop was a little bit loose, but like
Yeah.
I think on this river, I think both played it well.
Yeah, he made up for his loose open by making a badass shove on the river, I would say.
Yeah, that's exactly like he did play well post flop. Like I said, I'm not cash game specialist, so I'm not gonna say more about Andy because I don't know him better. I've seen few.
That face. Look
Yeah,
at that face. I love
got it,
that.
face. Oh
God,
man.
I feel you, Garrett. I feel you, G man. That's the worst. Ah. And that is something important to think of too. You know, like if you don't want to get wild post flop, like a lot of poker you can get by just playing straightforward, solid
Mm.
poker. You know, play against worse players. Let them. Yes, I love that face. Let them make mistakes. Andy's going to get a little more out of line because Andy also has a bunch of tricks up his sleeve post flop. You know, like
Mm.
so. I think that's an important thing to know. Like if you do feel like you have an edge over people, you can maybe engage a little bit more post flop. But you're gonna have to be willing to do some stuff, you know, dig
Mm.
yourself out of some holes post flop. And if you don't want to do nifty stuff like that post flop, then you just don't have to be as crazy pre flop either. You know, make sure there's like an alignment between the two
Mm.
things. Oh God,
Exactly.
his facial expressions are so great.
Exactly. That's why, for example, somebody like Tom Twan gets away with it, like Durr, because
Hmm.
he's just so good post flop. Like, I mean,
Yep.
the guy is just so good post flop. Even if he's making like very loose plays pre flop, he can get away with it. Like post flop, just making people fold like absurd hands, and like,
Yep.
and somehow he makes people fold always big hands, even though he never has anything. So
I know, right? It is such a phenomenon with that guy, how they see him bluffing all the time, yet he still makes them make big folds. And then when he has the goods, they always pay him off. It's like seems like it's perfect poker almost. Like I'd say Durr and Adelstein are both two of my favorite players to watch. Like it's awesome. Andy, Mr.
mm,
Andy Stacks over here is moving up that list every time I watch him make a really awesome play too.
mm.
And there it goes. There it goes, ladies and gentlemen. Into the muck it goes. And that's the cool
Yeah.
customer Andy is. He doesn't even show it. You know, he doesn't rub that bluff in as Garrett hangs his head. He knows he's going to watch the footage later. And he looks over at his opponent.
But I think Garrett looked fairly happy. He's kind of like, okay, you got it if you bluff me, but I'm never calling here. He knows he's never calling
Yes.
here, you know?
And I like how you said that too. I say that a lot to students too. Like, you know, that's one of the spots where I say, you know what? They probably had it, and if they're bluffing, kudos to you, sir. You made an awesome bluff, and
Exactly.
you win today. That is totally fine. You earned that pot, and I'm with you. I think Garrett probably felt pretty good about that fold.
Mm,
Probably just felt more annoyed that he got coolered, essentially.
yeah, exactly. I think that's one of those things in poker. Like the more you play, the more you get used to it. It's like when I first started playing poker, I was always pissed when somebody bluffed me out of the pot, or they made a great play, and I folded. I'm like, okay, wow, I did not expect you to bluff me there. like that
Yep.
or whatever, and then they show me the hand, and I used to get very upset about that, but like I think these days it's just better to be like, kudos, like I'll take a note of that and move on. Next time maybe I'll call it.
Yes.
Like it's like,
I love what you said about taking note of that. Don't take it personally. Just try to learn from it and improve on the next one.
exactly. But yeah, thank you for watching the video. I hope you enjoyed. And we will do similar next week. So it'll
Yeah.
be good.
Best of luck this weekend, guys. Take it easy.
Ciao.